Greatness Podcast with Jason and Jolene.
Pete was selling these, yeah.
Oh, selling them?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he gave one to me.
Okay. I was like, did you give it to him and now he's selling it? Because that's a dick move. Okay. I thought. I was like, didn't Jason give that to him? No, he gave. Okay.
Yeah, as representative of our friendship.
Right.
Right. Welcome back to the Into Greatness Podcast with Jason and Jolene. I am obviously Jason.
I am Jolene.
I mean, I guess in this day and age, though, could go either way.
It could. Was that recording?
Yeah, it was the whole time.
That's so funny. Oh, man. No wonder you were looking at me funny. I didn't realize Jason pressed record. He's probably edited out by now, but that's funny. Okay.
That was good. That was good. So, this is kind of a two-parter episode of the Into Greatness Podcast because pop culture, music, books, television, film are all very, I think, representative of the individual. It's a way for people to kind of express themselves, help identify themselves, and in all instances, I find all those sort of forms of entertainment can be very, in a way, healing. In a sense, right? They can definitely be. They can be cathartic. They can be help you get emotions out that you can't usually get out of your body or your system, etc. So this first part, we're talking movies, TVs, books that have, in some way, shape, or form, helped us through tough times, helped us maybe find part of our identities, helped us find authenticity, or maybe just when you're having that really shitty-ass day, it's that thing that makes you feel good.
They're influential. They're meant to be influential for good or bad reasons, right? Like media, mainstream media, even, the off path, everything's meant to be influential. So I guess maybe what we're looking at is like how influential some of these things have been in our lives. Yep. Okay.
Exactly.
And usually that's connected to the feels.
And so this time we're going to focus on like movies, TV, books that have kind of helped in some way.
Yeah, and you have heard us do this through the last couple seasons, is we will reference things that have strongly influenced us. You've seen it in the studio here. Jason has posters up. He's talked about Lego. We've talked about very nostalgic things, including your buddy, right? Like who
lives in that
lives
now.
in the past in a sense there, right? So we have referenced this as a flavor and a supportive kind of theme to the podcast, but we're actually giving it its own episode.
Yeah.
And explaining. And in this, we want you to kind of lose yourself in the music the moment you own it.
Blah, blah, blah. Never let it go.
Right?
Right?
That was timely. So lose yourself in the eras that these parts of you experienced, the movies, the books, the whatever, right?
Yep.
Yeah, right? That 8 Mile was a very influential time. I remember that year. I remember that Halloween, dressing up as Ninja Turtles, going to the Max, and then we danced to that song, and we were so badass as these Ninja Turtles. Like, that's an era of my life with, like, 3 other very specific friends who also made up the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then the Ninja Turtles were also very influential of my childhood because my dad was like obsessed with the cartoon for a period of time.
That was huge.
Yeah.
I remember when that became
First
so
movie
big.
I ever saw in a theater, Jay.
The live action one where the guys in the cost, like the Jim Henson group did the Muppet things.
I don't know, just the very first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
That was a great movie.
That was my first movie theater experience.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Mine was Star Wars.
Oh.
I'd seen movies before that, but that's the one that sort of changed my life kind of thing.
I was just looking at your Star Wars keychain there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Everywhere.
So that right there, what we just did in a snapshot is what we're doing this whole episode. When we name one song, you hear lyrics to something, where does that blast you back to? This movie, where does it blast you back to? Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is cool because it works. It's a triggering effect, right?
And it's a way to landmark ourselves. Like I think about right now in like Google Maps or something. Is it Google Maps or Maps or whatever? It's not MapQuest anymore, I've been told.
Nope, it's not.
But you can like pin your location. That's essentially what we're doing along our timeline when things like this happen. Like, oh, right, that was the year that Baywatch came out, or that was the year, and they're linked with times. People remember back in the 90s, TGIF, or when you had the Much Music Countdown. Like, there's times of our lives that are capsuled. They're like time capsuled into these experiences that TV shows, movies, songs, books, like captured.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we so value all those different forms of entertainment. For one thing, it's everywhere. Like most people at night when they're going to chill out, it's like they read a book,
And
they watch a movie, they watch TV, or they listen to music.
They speak to a part of us. So sometimes with that late night TV watching, it connects them with their partner. So people who were watching Yellowstone and shows like this, right? Like them and their partners would connect, or it's the part of them that secretly wanted Unavailable Cowboys, you know, or I can speak to that wound. And, you know, all those kinds of things, right? Usually they reflect a part of ourselves, and like it's validation in front of our very eyes, because very rarely are any of these things built off of the nothings. There's always these grains of truth and commonality that we really glob onto, right?
Big time.
Okay, cool. So let's dive into it. Jay laid all these out. I got to tell you guys, okay, so the coolest part about this episode is you were going to get a live depiction of what left brain and right brain, masculine and feminine differences are. So Jay asked me to do this list weeks ago, and I have yet to be able to sit down and make this list. As we speak right now, I still don't have the list in my head, you guys, okay? He has 3 fucking pages
with notes
of written, like examples of things. And I was like, wow, that is left brain at its like prime capacity. So me, you're getting intuitive, emotive responses that feel inspired in the moment. And that is like the definition of how I'm led through a lot of this podcast too. And I think you are too, Jay,
most of the
right?
time. Yeah, most of the time.
You don't really pre-plan a ton of stuff, but you are getting a live left, right brain version of this as we speak, folks.
That's right.
Cool.
That's right. So for the 5 sort of movies, TV shows, books, I can't speak today. One of them, and this is like in no particular order.
Yeah.
Either it's just sort of, I sat down and I was like, okay, what are 5 things that really have stuck with me? And bang, these are the ones that came out.
Cool.
So one of them is the movie Streets of Fire from 1984.
Boom. I was 2.
I was 12. And the thing is, I didn't even watch it the year it came out. It's something like, I remember seeing the poster, and it starred Michael Pare and then a very young Diane Lane. Plus Willem Dafoe was his first movie, like Rick Moranis, directed by Walter Hill, who had done like 48 Hours, with Eddie Murphy and whatnot, Nick Nolte. And it was sold as like a rock and roll fable. I didn't watch it because I didn't care about that kind of stuff then. Yeah. But I remember like 10, 15 years later, I rented it and I watched it.
Wow.
Just on a whim, right? Because I was watching stuff I hadn't seen before. And it's one of those, and now, I mean, I've tracked down the soundtrack on vinyl because it's a great 80s soundtrack, rock soundtrack. And the movie's not so much a musical, but it's like a Western 1950s comic book, sci-fi kind of, literally, the way the director sums it up is the Queen of the Hop, who's Diane Lane, who's a rock singer, is kidnapped by the leader of the pack, who's Willem Dafoe, who's a biker gang guy. And Soldier Boy, Diane Lane's ex-boyfriend, comes back to do something about it. And that's the plot.
What spoke to you about it? Like, what grabbed you about it so much?
I think it's one of those, it's a nebulous thing, but watching it, I just feel good watching it.
Cool.
Like, it's never do the stakes get so high where you're like, don't know what's going to happen. Like, you know how it's going to play out. But it kind of gives you everything you want.
I like that.
And it's exciting and it's funny and the dialogue is really like bang, 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 really quick back and forth.
That's your Mercury.
That's your Mercury right there. And Michael Pare, that was like one of his first films. He's a really great underrated actor, but he's like one of those kind of iconic, classic kind of tough guys sort of thing. And he partners up with Amy Madigan, who's like a soldier, another soldier, ex-soldier. And it's like, but they don't get together, but they get bust each other's balls the whole time. You know what I mean? It's really good. And like Willem Dafoe is like creepy, badass kind of bad guy. And it's just, but the music is so good. Like it's almost like a musical, but it's not. Oh. Because she's a rock and roll star, right?
You felt that movie.
Yeah.
You didn't watch it. You felt it.
I felt it. And every
once
in a while, if I'm having a shitty day, I can put that movie in or I'll put the soundtrack on and it's a mood elevator.
Neat. And it would be interesting to go back and look at that time of your life and why that spoke so greatly to you. Was that a state of being you hadn't experienced in a while and that movie helped create it for you? Like I tell people to go do this. Like if you can't cry in real life, I don't know, just go watch your show and cry. I don't care how you get it, just get it out.
Yeah.
So for you, there was something about that emotion, the emoting of it that was like, that's what captivated you.
It must have been. Because I mean, it came out in 84, so I was 12. So I was the year, where was like Temple of Doom came out, Ghostbusters, and more into that stuff. But I probably watched it like 94. Yeah. Maybe. So that was like 2-3 years after Dad died. It was in a pretty down spot. And it's one of those movies that kind of came out of nowhere because I hadn't watched it yet. And it was just something that made you feel good.
Cool.
So yeah.
Okay. What else you got on the list there?
It's another one. Of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark. We've all talked about my Indiana Jones infatuation and how that movie's influenced my life. And I think that came out in 81. So I was 9. And that was like one of those cases where that was a character I just wanted to be. And I kind of done that. Like, he's a globe-trotting archaeologist, but all the stuff's got mysticism involved in it, and it's adventure, and he wears his cool hat and all that kind of stuff. There was no movie like it before then. There hasn't really been anything since, even with sequels, and, they kept making them and stuff. And there's something just about that character. He's just this iconic, larger-than-life, legendary character.
Cool.
And it resonated, and it influenced sort of, like, I look at what I've done. I haven't been an archaeologist, but all the stuff I've done has been very, like, journalism was adventure-based kind of job. Filmmaking, you get to travel and do cool stuff. And then with the paranormal investigation, you're going to different places, hearing different stories and proving whether they're real or not. Yeah, it was just really this highly influential experience.
Do you ever play the song in the back of your mind at times when you've succeeded?
All the time. Oh yeah, that kind of just plays. Even subconsciously, sometimes I'll even sing it out loud. Yeah. Dun, da, 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 da.
Well, and that's like the geniusness, and we'll talk about music in another episode, but that's where like music behind everything is so powerful and how it impacts our feelings. You can look at one thing and change the music to it and completely change the experience, right? So yeah, all those things. Interesting, because when you talk about Indiana Jones, I don't know if I think I remember watching the movies, but all I think of is a Disney ride. I remember that when I was in grade 1 in Disneyland, going on that ride. And then, of course, this last summer, too, which was neat for me to go on it and think about what I remembered of it from the first time.
So many years later, right?
Yeah, it was really neat. Because that was something my dad really loved, too, right?
Yeah.
So, cool.
Well, I think, too, that was something like Dad and I watched Indiana Jones. So something we relate to a lot.
That was Star Wars for my sister and my dad. Yeah, that was their thing. I don't know if I've really ever truly seen a Star Wars episode.
Well, you need to watch one of them.
I know. The Star Wars rides at Disneyland were the most impressive ones.
Star Tours was mind-blowing.
Oh, Star Tours. That's a different one. So that's like...
That was the older ride.
The older one, yeah. So the new Star Wars rides are like a 20-minute experience.
I've heard that,
when you go through the lineup and stuff. It was wild. Like, it was the most impressive. You don't even need to understand the new versions of Star Wars and all the characters to truly, like, appreciate the brilliance of that. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah,
cool. Okay, what else you got on your list?
What else we got here? Jaws.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's the best movie ever made.
Right? Yeah, we're going to need a bigger boat.
We're going to need... And I think it's so much part of a cultural lexicon, too, right? But I remember watching it. Obviously, it came out in 1975 when I was 3, so I didn't see it. I didn't see it till I was a teenager because my parents wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
And I remember watching... That's where it sort of started. We'd always go to Dora and Albert White's for dinner. They were friends of my parents. And they had, in a separate room, a Betamax machine.
Oh.
And we didn't have any VHS or anything like that at the time, right? So I could rent a movie and watch it over there. That's the one time I got to rent movies and watch it. And I remember renting Jaws.
Wow.
And really enjoying it. And it was kind of creepy and like exhilarating. And then the one scene where he actually says the bigger boat, where he's chumming the water. He's like, you come down here and chum this shit. And the shark comes out and moves. I remember jumping out of my chair. I get goosebumps even thinking about it, even though I've watched the movie 100 times. Jumped out of my chair, paused it, ran out into the room. And even though my parents, it seems like, you guys got to watch this. It's the most amazing thing ever, right? Because it wasn't a real shark, but it looked so, you know what I mean? But the movie just made it real. Like, you forget it's this fake shark. You get Spielberg so invests you in the characters, the plot, the suspense, that you just suspend all disbelief and just get carried away with it.
Totally. And I think the other thing about that is when we think about all these wild and crazy movies that are scary and animals and creatures, the old school ones where we had less sci-fi and techie stuff, we had to use real life shit.
Yeah.
And that made it real. That made you not want to go in the water at the lake, even though sharks aren't in the lake. Are you sure sharks aren't in the lake, right?
But your brain starts thinking that it could be possible.
It was the possibility of it. Because you could watch Reba McEntire's Tremors and be like, that shit ain't real.
Yeah.
But it scares me, and it's kind of crazy living in a desert.
That's
in
a very cool movie.
I don't know.
That's a very cool movie.
I feel like I've watched that movie 12 times as a kid, right? Like, it was always on a channel at some given time. But that's the difference between those two. Like, Jaws had such a bigger impact because it was more real.
Oh,
right?
yeah. And even Raiders of the Lost Ark compared to, say, Dial of Destiny, which just came out. Like, when they made Raiders, there's some, like, special effects added in later. But 95% of that is
where
live.
There's, like, a snake pit?
There's the snake pit. They had real snakes.
Yeah.
Some fake ones.
Yeah.
But, like, when it's not like Harrison Ford, but when Indy's on the truck and he gets pushed out the window, he's on the front of the truck and he crawls underneath it with the whip and gets dragged behind. Like, when I showed that to Griffin's like, Dad, that's someone
He
real.
really did that.
And I'm like, yes, they did. And that's what makes those movies so much better even than the newer Indiana Jones, where you could tell it's CGI and all this other stuff.
Yeah,
right?
I don't even know what that stands for.
Computer-generated images.
Okay.
Right?
I do.
But I think that's a big part of it too. We're just older movies you somehow get more invested in.
Yeah, and
for that reason.
They're just more fucking real.
They're more real.
They're more real, which makes, because the more out there we make these car crashes, like, you know, flipping 7 times instead of 2.5, right? Our brain says, all right, that's kind of excessive.
Yeah.
Right?
But when you see the one
also
crash,
feeding the dopamine high that
for sure
our brains need now, right? Because 2.5 flips isn't good enough.
Oh yeah, and in the movie Lethal Weapon, the big showstopper scene is where a car gets hit by a bus and it rolls up the front of the bus and flips. Yeah. But if you made that movie now, the bus would hit the car would fly through the air, explode, go through a front storefront, and the chase would go on for 20 minutes, right?
Totally. Yeah. You know what's funny is, as you're talking, we'll get to your next two in a sec, but as you're talking, I'm picturing the front of the VHSs as you say these movies. And I'm going to tell you guys why. So when I was growing up, my mom, a family friend, her boss, our neighbor, anyways, his family member like supplied all the gas stations and movie marts with their rental movies. So when they would come off the shelves, you'd have 20 versions go down to 5 in stock. Yeah. So the other 15, I guess, whatever, he would take them. So this guy's basement was an actual movie rental place.
That's
like,
awesome.
You just walk into the basement. So we would always say, like, can we go over there and rent movies, like grab movies? So my sister and I would come home with like armfuls of movies. So I watched a lot of movies as a kid because we could literally go there. It didn't cost us money, right? Because I mean, it was a big deal to go and rent a movie.
Oh yeah, and if you didn't have,
I think it was $4 or something back then.
$4, and if you didn't have the player, you had to rent the player on top of it, which was expensive.
Had the VHS.
We did too later on.
You know, but so that was like, that's where it's funny because Kevin said you don't watch TV, but you know all these movies, and that's why, is because we would go and get handfuls of them. So it's funny when you talk about this, I see the front of the movie. Yeah.
Oh, and it's great. Like I even have.
Oh, he's got Jaws right behind us, folks.
Yeah, I got that's just awesome.
We'll
like,
have to take a picture of that for the our Instagram page.
Instagram pages.
All right, what's your next ones?
The next one is 2 TV shows for my 4th and 5th. I didn't pick books. Yeah. Books are harder.
Okay.
I find, because like my favorite books would be the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, but I think it's because there's 7 of them, and it took me from like the 80s to like 2008 when he wrote the last one. Yeah. So it's just an expansive time, so much life. But I don't reread books much. I can read them once. Right. Kind of thing. Yep. So I didn't really put any on the list. But the next one would be a TV show that aired from 96 to 99 called Millennium. It's created by Chris Carter, who did The X-Files. Okay. And it starred Lance Henriksen, who's like a great character actor, as a retired FBI profiler who gets recruited by the Millennium Group to investigate these serial killings. So why would this be a show? Like, it's dark as fuck. And it got a little lighter over season 2 and 3, and they kind of got deviated from the serial killer stuff into more supernatural stuff, which was kind of neat. But the show just, I don't know, it hit me at just some point in life where I was a bit lost. I didn't know where I wanted to go. And it was just for the first time anything like that had been on TV, where it was kind of just, it almost felt that kind of dim and hopeless. But the character of Frank Black, for one, his first name's Frank, like my dad's name, was a guy who had suffered like horrible trauma, but was given this odd gift where he could see what the killer could see. And that's how he would catch them. Wow. Right? So he had to get into the head of these evil people to catch them. So in his real life, he had a wife and a daughter. He would really strive to keep that dark element from them. And even painting his house yellow. So it was like this symbol of hope, right? And it was always bright against all the dark palette of everything else. But also, no matter how hard, the theme of it was, no matter how hard you try to keep the darkness out, it still creeps in. And it's how you deal with that kind of defines you as a person, makes you see a good person as opposed to someone who gives in with it. So like a lot going on in this show.
Wow. That's cool. I like that. That makes me kind of prompt our listeners here, you know, as we go through these, which movies or forms of media, you know, link you to fond memories of your childhood? Which ones happened and you anchored into them during times when you were making changes or adjustments or things like that, right? Which ones just genuinely have memories because maybe there was a lot of... like you watch them a lot or you listen to them a lot, right? Like sometimes it was purely just the frequency of it. Yeah. Right? Or like my mom would always have this on in the background. So that's something I've always linked or connected with.
Yeah, you hear the song or watch the show, say like, what was that one TV, there's a Canadian show that had a song like, da-na-na-na-na, Da-na-na-na-na. Like they used it in Austin Powers, this song.
Oh.
It was like a game show called Definition. But you hear
okay.
this song and it's like you just remember. I remember being a kid and it playing on like the television, you know.
Totally.
Yeah.
Even like think back to Price is Right or whatever, right? Yep, for sure. What's your last one you got?
My last one is a new show. Well, newish, called Lethal Weapon.
Oh, it was like, that's a movie.
It was, with Mel Gibson in it, and they adapted it for TV in 2016.
Okay.
Which, I was like, I remember when it was announced, I'm like,
that's
fuck
weird.
This bullshit. Why would you do that? And how could you recreate this kid? Love or hate Mel Gibson, he's a good actor, and he was Riggs.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how could they do it? And I resisted watching it for a long time, and then one day I think I was bored. And so I just put the pilot on. I rented it for 99 cents on Apple TV. And it stars Damon Wayans as Murtaugh, which was Danny Glover's character. Yeah. So that's kind of one of the reasons I tuned in. And then an actor I'd never heard of named Clayne Crawford, who played Riggs. And first off, like, he didn't do what Mel Gibson did. He made his own character out of Riggs. Yeah. Still adhering to the lethal, the aspect of this guy. But his portrayal of someone dealing with trauma was so believable and so powerful. Like, he made it wasn't an act, like, it's a lot, every episode there's a car chase, something blows up, there's the one-liners, everything you would expect. But his portrayal of, and I just was going to go into therapy at that point. I'd done it, and I was kind of getting to the point where I knew I needed to go back in. His behaviors, the way he'd suppress certain things, or he'd cover up certain emotions, but when you saw him in the off moments, it was so believable.
That's cool. So what I'm thinking of there, Jay, is, you know how we said like just mainstream media and stuff is so influential in current day society. Well, I wonder if our, unveiling of trauma, our recognition of it, and all of our new information we have on it literally helped an actor reveal 10 times more of the characteristics of what someone with that trauma would look like, because we've never acknowledged it that way before. So Mel Gibson was only given half of a character script.
Oh yeah, because back in 1986,
because
when the
as
movie
a
came out,
society, that's all we had.
Yeah,
right. We didn't see how trauma manifested in people's behavior and mannerisms and all of that.
Yeah.
So once we learned more, they were like, we could build this character 10 times better.
Oh yeah, and
to actually hit the eyes and brains and hearts of men. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and he nailed it. Like, and I actually started following him on Instagram because he got fucked over by the makers of this show too, and they wrote him out.
Okay.
For the third season when the show just bombed after that.
Yeah.
And he sustained a really good career. But I followed him on Instagram, and I just sort of see comments like people who were soldiers would comment and say, "Thank you for your portrayal of Riggs. You made him, and you know what I mean. Your show helped me through this, and it helped get me through times. I go back and watch episodes just for certain moments when I'm just having a rough day or." Just, when you got something on your brain and you can't sort through how you're feeling. He did such a good job. So he's a great actor. So if you want to, and he's made movies since, more indie movies. I had like one called The Killing of Two Lovers and the other one called The Integrity of Joseph Chambers, where I hope people watch these because he seems to really be interested in touching on how men are portrayed in society, how they deal with their emotions. Like, as an actor, he seems very fascinated with that. Yeah. And he's very good at portraying those things.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. And again, lots on men's mental health stuff here. That speaks to so much of that. So when we think about like influential movies and things, I don't really have a list, but I'll tell you what's blasted through my mind at different times here. As in my younger years, I really loved 101 Dalmatians.
Oh gosh, yeah, the cartoon.
I guess I just want to rescue puppies.
Yeah,
right. Which is funny because there is a dog that looks identical to Nikki that is needing to be rehomed right now at Angel's Animal Rescue, and I legitimately was like, "That is my dog. What the heck?"
Yeah,
looks just like her. Still needs a home. So I remember that was like a whole phase of my life, so much as I dressed up as Cruella de Vil one year, but like all my friends knew, like, I loved Dalmatians, that movie, everything. I could watch it a million times. I don't know, it was just something that probably my favorite Disney movie.
What'd you think of the live action one they did?
Never watched it.
Yeah,
I feel like I just don't, it's recent and I don't do any of that stuff right now, but I don't know if I would. I wanted to, because I was like, oh my god, that was my favorite movie. So I don't think I would be opposed to it or whatever, because there's so much space between when I liked that and literally just like stopped liking it for a period of time. Everyone knows my obsession with Napoleon Dynamite, Austin Powers. I love Ridiculous Reasons to Laugh, and I feel like both of those movies are the things that happen inside my head on a regular basis that rarely externalize, and when they do, I'm like, I'm the weird person. These are the things I'm saying and doing, and I just love how ridiculous it was. But then, like, can't be too ridiculous, like Mr. Bean, which would frustrate me.
Yeah.
So I would watch it, but get so frustrated because I'm like, there's so much misfortune coming to this man, you know?
Yeah, and I remember Alicia telling me, like, why do you like watch horror and all this stuff? Like, why don't you, because of your experiences, why don't you watch more comedy? And I'm like, because for one, if a comedy is not funny, which I don't find most of them very funny, I get angry.
Yeah.
And whereas the horror stuff is almost cathartic, and the action stuff, like there's a release of these tensions and emotions. I find a lot more than trying to laugh it off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the Napoleon Dynamite's brilliant.
Right.
The Big Lebowski, stuff like that. Yeah.
I remember a movie as like in my younger years picking out those movies, right? I remember Stand By Me being one that I would continually go back to.
Based on a Stephen King story.
Yeah. I remember my first Stephen King book that I read. I went through the Goosebumps and the Fear Street and then the Stephen King phase, which is funny because I don't do any murder mystery stuff now.
No.
But in my younger years, I loved that. Like if I was going to read, I would go on like big binges with those kind of books. Nothing else really, like not Babysitter's Club, none of that bullshit. I wanted like the dark stuff, which is funny because now I work in the dark stuff, so I don't need to escape into it, I don't think. Like I love the real life yuckies. So I think that kind of probably spoke to that part of me that was like, don't get scared by this, right?
Yeah.
Because you'll get used to hearing these
You'll need to
stories
get used
all
to,
the time.
It's almost like a preparation for what's to come.
I wonder. I'm actually just literally realizing that right now in my head because I have wondered why I don't do the murder mystery thing and all that. Other influential series I can think of, I kind of jumped late into the bandwagon of Grey's Anatomy, like 6 seasons in or something. Didn't give a shit about the first ones. I just kind of picked up where it left off. But it was during like a heavier time in my life where I just needed like a break from work and school. So that would be the one thing I'd sit down with. I think it was like Thursdays at 8 or something and watch the one episode. But I was guaranteed to cry. And I used to be a really emotional person, and then I hardened for a period of time. So I remember intentionally watching that show, making sure I was alone. I wouldn't watch with like Chad or somebody else, and I would just cry.
Yeah.
And it was my way of getting tears. So I didn't even care about the storylines because it got so complicated, but it was a guaranteed cry. They did a great job of hitting the feels.
Nice.
Another one actually that my ex and I used to watch together was This Is Us. And it was because there were so many parallels of adoption, twins, the dad dying. What were some of the other things? Because he was adopted, right?
Okay,
We had twins. My dad had died. We looked at each other in the first episode and we were like, holy shit. So we both got quite invested in that show. And that's the one time a week we would actually come together, sit on separate couches, but watch it. And we'd watch the PVRs on, like he'd usually watch downstairs and I'd be upstairs if we did. But we would make sure that we didn't like touch that PVR'd episode. So that was like the one time we'd come together for that common experience. And I think there was probably a lot of validation unspoken in those. So when I say like when couples will watch shows and things together, observe what's happening within you at that time, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting to see why and when you utilize some of those things. I can actually reference books that have had different influence on me, and it's funny because I don't actually really remember what they were about, but I remember how I felt when I read them and that they were important then. So I remember in elementary school a book called A Wrinkle in Time.
I remember that book, yeah.
I don't remember what it's about.
Couldn't
I
tell you
remember
either.
something about identical houses and then someone with a different colored ball or something. But I remember it just warping my brain from the inside out and going, whoa. Which now is probably really helpful. And it was probably a bit of foresight into like, just wait, shit'll blow your mind later.
Yeah, it's coming.
But I remember that book being profoundly catching my attention. I loved The Outsiders.
Of course, yeah.
I loved The Outsiders. And I have come to learn that I am a fan of the underdog and probably too much of a fan of them at times. But I really loved that movie. And again, you want to talk about men's mental health. Yep. That Stand By Me. I wonder how much of that actually spoke to me witnessing my dad struggle through life and how I just really empathized with that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because that was his childhood. Like he spoke so much of stories like those things, Stand By Me, and like just this like free range boy out there, right?
Well,
with
that was
a
a
dad
different
who's
time.
passed away, a mean stepdad, all the things, right? And then recently in my times, this is the stuff that'll be a little bit more up your alley, folks. Untamed. I remember at the beginning of my separation, I read that book about 3 times. A friend, colleague, actually she was my student at the time, was a colleague more recently. So it was a lovely little collision at the time, but she gave me that book and it was the best fucking gift ever. I bawled through it. It was the first hard copy, like handheld book I had read in years because my master's and BSW ruined me in terms of reading. I just didn't want to, right? And I remember that book just being so transformative by Glennon Doyle. So many transferable skills and just moments and reflections that just hit everyone. So I passed that book around. I have no idea where it is, but I passed it through many women and I'm sure they've passed it on as well. So if that's one that has not crossed your path, especially women, hit it up. It is
Untamed.
life changed. Yeah, Untamed. And for both genders, I have always recommended Green Lights. This was also through this more recent transformation of my life over the last 4 or 5 years. Those two books were profound. So I love Matthew McConaughey's. It's like a memoir. It's a self-help. It's this insight to appreciate him as more than a rom-com. I've referenced him on here so many times, but that was a book actually that recently traveled to Bali with a client of mine.
Nice.
I lent it to them. Yeah. So yeah, really cool. And you get to see his handwritten journal notes and things in
That's
there too.
neat.
And
Yeah.
I think there's parts behind these actors where, in my workshop, I ask people what actor would you have play a role in your life? And often it's because of, is it who we see them as a person or who they've portrayed in certain movies and stuff, right? Or what is it about them that has these admirable qualities? And I do think that we connect both with the actors or actresses and the characters they play. It's such an art, right?
I think so. I think for certain performers, there's some who will play kind of anything. But I mean, you look at Clint Eastwood, he's not Dirty Harry or the Man with No Name, but there is those characters in him.
Yeah.
And same with Harrison Ford. You look at the characters he's played and then you kind of see interviews with him. He's not them, but you sure can see a lot of them in him.
Yeah, totally. A cool little quickie one is the Tao of Pooh, and you learn about
the Tao of Pooh,
Taoism
yep.
and how each of the characters in Winnie the Pooh kind of represent these different things. So I love that book. It's a quick reference and a neat way to learn. And I remember in a philosophy class, I talked about this in one of the episodes, Sophie's World. I don't remember the details of it, but I remember this book called Sophie's World, and it was away. I think her dad was away in Lebanon or something, and he would send these letters back, and we learned about Marxism. We learned about all of these different philosophies through this story instead of a textbook, and it was amazing. So I remember that being really cool, taking somewhat dry material and making it more exciting for me.
Which is awesome when someone can do that.
Yeah. So I feel like those are the ones that stand out the most for me. And then also, if I think of my kids and the things that really core memories that you start to create, Dr. Seuss is a fucking genius.
He is, isn't he? And the guy that wrote those, you have to find the little yellow bug. The gold bug story books.
Oh, more the little hedgehoggy looking guy.
Kind of like that. Yeah. It's
little somebody's.
Yeah, something like that. I remember Griffin and I'd read them all the time. Yeah.
That's funny. Hey?
I can't remember the name of the books for the life of me.
Totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, even thinking about that, what were our first experiences with these books that made us feel good? And when you read Dr. Seuss, it just makes you feel good. It's predictable. You can predict it before it happens, right? It's usually joyful. It's very interesting. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
That's the power of story, I think.
Oh, for sure.
But no matter what form it's told.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful medium.
So we want you guys to think of some of these things. Maybe we've already spoken to some that really stand out for you, but what are the different eras of your life? I can totally think of people and places that were connected to those times. So another, a TV show that I really connected with in my early 20s, late teens, when I was living on my own in an apartment. I just talked to my mom about this because they started watching the series Prison Break.
Oh, yeah.
When I say I was always a fan of the underdog, I think it's because as especially a social worker, I like the gray area of how someone doing something bad doesn't mean they're a bad person. And sometimes we have to do the wrong thing because it ends up being it's the right thing, right?
That's
He was breaking his
do.
brother out of jail for not committing the crime. But then there's also this crazy part of me. I remember being devastated to find out that he was gay because I thought he was so hot and that I had a chance with him. My sister, I even made me a t-shirt with Wentworth Miller's name or his face on it, and it said "My boyfriend's in jail." I kid you not, she actually made me Prison Break t-shirts. This is back in the day. You had to go do it at the mall.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it was so funny because I was just so obsessed with him. Like there was this, but he was a good guy doing bad things because, you
had to do it.
So hilarious.
It's the underdog. It's the anti-hero, right? And we are attracted to those characters no matter what, right?
You even learn to love Teabag at the end of it. Like, gross. Yeah. So, anyways, and how like positions of authority were actually the deceitful ones and stuff.
Yeah.
It was a genius series, and it's actually neat because I've talked to some younger folks. Like our billet right now is watching the Suits series, and actually Chad and I used to watch that as well. And that was another one of the things that I was like, oh, I'm interested in this because Harvey was so fucking hot. But it was also because the intensity of you can really identify with some of those characters, and there's these extreme versions of us inside these characters at times, right? Yeah, so it's neat because I to see him watching that, I was like, oh my God, that's like so 10 years ago. That's so awesome you're watching that, right?
Well, so the best stuff is timeless.
Yeah.
It's enjoyed.
Just like you with that movie, right?
Yeah.
25 years later or whatever.
Watching it, and I think that's why they made Lethal Weapon into a TV series like almost 30 years after it was a popular movie franchise.
And we'll roll into this in the next episode when we talk about music. Like when you see like 2 generations from now wearing Motley Crue shirts and you're like, you don't even know, right?
Oh yeah.
And any of that Rolling Stones, like you don't even know. Like that was the depths of someone's existence at 15, 20, Back
in the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
That was a lot to unpack. We got a lot more to unpack on your next favorite episode coming up next week. Till then, I'm Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Stay golden, Ponyboy.
Yes!